Kellen's fist connected with the marble pillar so hard that blood splattered across the pristine white surface. "Absolutely not," he snarled, his dark eyes blazing as he faced his grandfather across the opulent study. I won't be bartered like livestock. You have no choice," Aldrich Voss replied coldly, not even glancing up from the marriage contract spread across his mahogany desk. "The Meridian Empire's collapse has left us with debts that could destroy 5 generations of our family. The Ashworth fortune is our only salvation." 300 miles away, Lorelei Ashworth was having her own battle. She hurled her teacup against the drawing room wall, watching the delicate porcelain shatter into 1,000 pieces, much like her dreams. "You promised me freedom after university, Papa. You swore I could choose my own path." Her father, Magnus Ashworth, stood rigid by the window, overlooking their vast estate. The weight of financial ruin had carved deep lines into his once jovial face. "The mining accident cost us everything, Lyra. 63 men dead, their families compensated, the government fines. We're hemorrhaging money faster than I can count. The Voss family offers a merger that could save us both. So you're selling. Me too, strangers? I'm saving our legacy, and theirs." The wedding ceremony 3 weeks later felt more like a funeral. Lorelei stood at the altar in her grandmother's ivory silk gown, her hands trembling as she stared at the tall, brooding stranger who was about to become her husband. Kellen's jaw was clenched so tightly she wondered if he might crack his teeth. Neither had spoken more than perfunctory greetings since meeting the day before. When the priest asked if she took this man to be her husband, Lorelei's voice caught in her throat. She could see her father's desperate eyes from the front pew, her mother dabbing tears with a lace handkerchief. Behind Kalen, his grandfather watched with the cold satisfaction of a man who had maneuvered his pieces perfectly across a chessboard. "I do," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Kellen's response was barely audible, delivered through gritted teeth. The reception was an exercise in practiced politeness and strained smiles. Lorelei felt like she was drowning in a sea of congratulatory faces, all pretending this wasn't the most transparent business transaction disguised as romance they'd ever witnessed. When Kalen finally approached her during the first dance, his hand on her waist felt like a prison shackle. "We need to establish ground rules," he murmured, as they swayed to the string quartet's rendition of a love song that mocked their situation. "This is purely contractual. Don't expect fairy tale nonsense from me." Lorelei lifted her chin defiantly. "Trust me, the last thing I want is to pretend this is anything more than what it is. 2 families using us to save their own skins." "Good. We understand each other." But as the dance continued, Lorelei caught something flickering in Kellen's eyes, a pain that mirrored her own. For just a moment, she wondered what dreams he had been forced to abandon. Then the music ended, and the mask of cold indifference slipped back into place. The newlyweds barely spoke during the drive to the Voss family's sprawling mountain estate. Lorelei pressed her face to the window, watching her old life disappear behind rolling hills and dense forests. When they finally arrived at the imposing stone mansion that would be her new prison, Kalen stepped out of the carriage first, not bothering to help her down. "Your rooms are in the east wing," he said curtly, not meeting her eyes. "Mine are in the west. I suggest we maintain that distance." As Lorelei stood alone in the circular drive, her wedding dress billowing in the evening breeze, she made herself a promise. She might be trapped in this loveless marriage, but she would never let it break her spirit. Little did she know that the man walking away from her had just made the exact same vow. For 3 months, Kalen and Lorelei perfected the art of living like ghosts in the same house. They developed an intricate dance of avoidance. He took breakfast at dawn before his business meetings. She preferred the library during his afternoon rides. Dinner was served separately in their respective wings, and they communicated only through hastily scrawled notes left with the household staff. The charade crumbled on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning when Lorelei discovered the estate's abandoned greenhouse. She had been exploring the grounds out of sheer boredom, her boots squelching through mud as she wandered past overgrown gardens and crumbling stone walls. The greenhouse stood like a forgotten cathedral, its glass panels spiderwebbed, with cracks, wild vines creeping through broken panes. Inside, Nature had reclaimed what humans had abandoned, exotic plants running wild, their blooms creating a riot of color among the decay. Lirelei was photographing a particularly stunning orchid with her father's old camera, when she heard footsteps crunching through the debris behind her. "What are you doing here?" Kellen's voice was sharp with surprise. She spun around, nearly dropping the camera. He stood in the doorway, his dark hair damp from rain, wearing work clothes instead of his usual impeccable suits. For the first time since their wedding, he looked almost human. "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, lifting her chin defiantly. "I come here to think. It's supposed to be private." Well, it's not exactly marked with a keep out sign. They stared at each other across the jungle of forgotten plants, the tension crackling like electricity. Then Lirelei noticed the sketchbook tucked under his arm, its pages curled with moisture. "You draw?" The question slipped out before she could stop herself. Kellen's expression shuddered immediately. "It's nothing." But Lirelei had caught a glimpse of the exposed page, delicate pencil strokes, capturing the wild beauty surrounding them. "Those are good, really good, don't." His voice carried a warning that made her step back. "Don't pretend to care about my hobbies when we both know this is all temporary." "Temporary? The marriage contracts have a clause. If our family's finances stabilize within 2 years, we can divorce with minimal penalty." He said it like he was discussing the weather. "I assumed you knew." Lirelei felt something twist in her chest. She couldn't tell which. Of course, temporary. A deafening crack of thunder shook the greenhouse, followed by a deluge so intense it turned the world beyond the glass walls into a blur. They were trapped. Kalen cursed under his breath and pulled out his phone. No signal. The storm must have knocked out the towers. How long do these mountain storms usually last? Hours, sometimes all night. They settled into an uneasy truce, sitting on opposite sides of an old potting bench. The silence stretched until Lirelei couldn't bear it anymore. "What did you want to be?" she asked quietly. "Before all this? Before the marriage? The family obligations? What did you actually want?" Callan was quiet for so long, she thought. He wouldn't answer. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "An architect. I wanted to design buildings that could change how people lived, create spaces that brought communities together instead of dividing them." "That's why you draw," he nodded stiffly. "Your turn, photojournalist." "I wanted to travel the world, document stories that mattered, show people things they'd never see otherwise." She gestured around the greenhouse. "Like this place. There's so much beauty and decay in things people have forgotten." "The Ashworth mining empire wasn't enough for you? Drawing pretty buildings have been enough for you?" For the first time since their wedding, Kalen almost smiled touche. As the storm raged around them, they found themselves talking about books. It's about places they dreamed of visiting, about the suffocating weight of family expectations. When Lirelei mentioned her photography, Kalen surprised her by asking to see her work on the camera's small screen. "These are extraordinary," he said softly, scrolling through images of abandoned places she'd discovered around the estate. "You sound surprised." "I am." Pleasantly. When their eyes met across the dim space, something shifted between them, a recognition of kindred spirits trapped in the same gilded cage. The greenhouse became their secret. Every afternoon, as if by unspoken agreement, they would find themselves drawn to that forgotten sanctuary. Kalen brought his sketchbooks, Lirelei her camera, and gradually, they began to rebuild the space together. It started practically, Kalan replacing broken glass panes while Lirelei documented the process, cataloging which plants could be saved, and which had grown too wild to recover. But soon it became something more intentional, almost ritualistic. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally sharing observations about light, about composition, about the way nature persisted despite neglect. "Hand me that propagation tray," Lirelei called from where she knelt beside a sprawling jasmine vine. Her hands were dirt-stained, her hair escaping its careful braid. Kalen paused in his sketching to watch her coax new growth from seemingly dead stems. "You're good at this. Did you garden before? My grandmother taught me." She said plants were like people, they could survive almost anything if someone cared enough to nurture them back to health. Lirelei glanced up at him. "What about you?" This architectural eye for structure and flow, where did that come from? My mother, actually. Before she died, she used to take me to old buildings around the city, just to point out how the original builders had solved problems with light and space. His pencil moved across the page, capturing the way afternoon sun filtered through the vine-covered roof. She said architecture was just problem-solving made beautiful. It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother. Lirelei felt the significance of the revelation like a physical warmth in her chest. Their tentative friendship was tested when Magnus Ashworth arrived unexpectedly for dinner. Lirelei hadn't seen her father since the wedding, and his appearance thinner, more haggard, shocked her. The government investigators are relentless. He confided over brandy in the main drawing room, while Kalen maintained polite silence. They're questioning every decision I made regarding the mine safety protocols. If they find criminal negligence, ... They won't, Lirelei said firmly, though her hands trembled as she poured tea. You followed every regulation, did I? Some nights, I can't sleep, wondering if I missed something, if I could have prevented those deaths. Magnus's voice broke.
Those families trusted me with their sons, their fathers.
Kalen surprised everyone by speaking up. Accidents happen even with perfect safety measures, sir. Holding yourself responsible for every variable beyond your control will destroy you. Magnus looked at his son-in-law with new interest. You sound like you're speaking from experience. My father died in a construction accident when I was 12. For years, I blamed the architect who designed the building, the engineer who calculated the loads, the foreman who scheduled the work. It took me a long time to realize that sometimes tragedy is just ... random, senseless. And carrying that guilt helps no one. After Magnus retired for the evening, Lirelei found Kalen standing on the mansion's front steps, staring up at the star-filled sky. Thank you, she said quietly. What you said about guilt and blame, Papa, needed to hear that. It was true, and he's not the monster I expected him to be. What did you expect? Heartless businessman who sold his daughter for profit. Instead, I see a man drowning in grief and responsibility, trying to do right by everyone he feels he's failed. Lirelei moved to stand beside him, close enough to smell his subtle cologne mixed with the greenhouse scent of earth and growing, things that now seemed to cling to them both. Is that what changed your mind about me too? It's realizing I wasn't the spoiled princess you expected? Kalen turned to look at her, his dark eyes unreadable in the moonlight. You were never what I expected, Lirelei. From the moment you threw that teacup at your father, instead of accepting your fate quietly, you knew about that? The servants talk. Word travels fast in these old families. They stood in comfortable silence until Lirelei asked, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently, under normal circumstances? Every day, Kalen admitted softly. But then I remember that people like us don't get normal circumstances. We get duty and obligation and the weight of other people's choices. Maybe, Lirelei said, her voice barely above a whisper. Or maybe we get second chances disguised as prisons. Everything changed the night Lirelei fell ill. She had been working in the greenhouse during a particularly cold snap, too absorbed in nursing a dying century plant back to health to notice her wet clothes or the temperature dropping. By evening, she was burning with fever. Kalen found her collapsed in her room when she failed to appear for their usual afternoon meeting. The sight of her pale, unconscious form sent panic racing through him with an intensity that terrified him. Call Dr. Whitmore immediately, he barked at the housekeeper, gathering Lirelei's limp body in his arms. Her skin felt like fire against his hands. For 3 days, he barely left her bedside. He took meetings from a chair pulled up to her, answered correspondence with one eye on her labored breathing, and held her hand through the worst of the fever dreams. When she cried out for her mother, he found himself whispering reassurances he didn't know he possessed. Don't leave me, she whispered during one lucid moment, her fingers clutching his with surprising strength. I'm not going anywhere, he promised, and meant it with a ferocity that shook him. Dr. Whitmore finally pronounced her out of danger on the 4th morning. As Lirelei slept peacefully for the first time in days, Kalen stepped onto the balcony and let himself fall apart. The relief, the terror, the overwhelming realization of what she had come to mean to him, it all crashed over him at once. He was in love with his wife. Desperately, completely, irrevocably in love. When Lirelei was strong enough to return to the greenhouse a week later, she found it transformed. Kalen had installed a heating system, weatherproofed the remaining gaps, and built raised beds that it would be easier on her back. In the center of the space, he'd planted the century plant she'd been trying to save, now thriving in a beautiful ceramic pot. You did all this while I was sick? I couldn't sleep anyway. And I figured if you were going to risk pneumonia for these plants, the least I could do was make the space safer. But Lirelei was staring at something else's sketch pinned to the potting bench that took her breath away. It showed her working among the plants, her face luminous with concentration and joy. Every line captured not just her physical appearance, but her essence, her spirit, her fierce determination to nurture life from abandonment. Calland. She breathed. I know what you're going to say. Turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. I crossed the line. I'm sorry. I'll destroy it.
Oh.
The word came out sharper than she intended. Don't you dare destroy it. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. When he faced her again, the vulnerability in his expression made her heart race. Lirelei, I need to tell you something. I love you too, she said before he could finish. The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Then Kalen was moving toward her, his hands framing her face with the same reverent care he brought to his drawings. It wasn't supposed to happen, he whispered against her lips. I know. We were supposed to remain strangers. I know. 2 years, and then freedom. I know. She smiled up at him, her heart breaking and mending simultaneously. Do you want to take it back? God, no. He kissed her then, pouring months of suppressed longing into the contact. But Lirelei, this complicates everything. The divorce clause. Our family's expectations, ... then we don't tell them. Not yet. She pulled back to meet his eyes. This is ours, our secret, our choice, our risk to take. Kalen studied her face, seeing the same determined courage that had first attracted him disguised as defiance. Are you sure? Once we cross this line, there's no going back to being strangers. I was never a stranger to you, Lirelei said softly. From that first dance, something in you recognized something in me. We were just too scared and angry to admit it. He kissed her again, deeper this time, tasting the truth of her words. Outside the greenhouse, snow began to fall, blanketing their secret world in pristine white. Inside, two people who had been forced together by circumstance finally chose each other freely. Their love affair bloomed in stolen moments and hidden glances. During formal dinners with visiting business associates, Kalen would brush Lirelei's fingers as he passed her the salt, sending electric shivers up her spine. She would find his sketches slipped under her bedroom door, intimate drawings of her hands tending plants. Her profile caught in afternoon light, her eyes bright with laughter at something only they shared. They developed an elaborate code. When Kalen wore his blue tie to breakfast, it meant he would be free that afternoon. When Lirelei arranged white roses in the main hall, she would be waiting in the greenhouse at sunset. Their separate bedrooms became part of the performance, maintaining the facade of a marriage in name only, while their hearts grew more intertwined each day. But secrets have a way of demanding acknowledgement. You're different, observed Kellen's aunt, Celestine Voss, during one of her unannounced visits. She was a sharp-eyed woman who had never married, dedicating her life to managing the family's social obligations with ruthless efficiency. Both of you they were taking tea in the conservatory, the three of them arranged in a triangle of barely concealed tension. Lirelei kept her expression carefully neutral, while Kellen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Different how? Lirelei asked pleasantly. Less miserable. When I attended your wedding, you both looked like you were marching to your executions. Now, Celestine stirred her tea thoughtfully. Now you look like people who share secrets. We share a house, Kalen said dryly. It would be impossible not to share some secrets. Indeed. But the question is, what kind of secrets? Celestine's smile was razor-sharp. The beneficial kind or the dangerous kind. That evening, Lirelei found Kalen pacing his study like a caged wolf. She knows, he said, without preamble. Celestine suspects something. So what if she does? We're married. We're allowed to grow fond of each other. Fawn Kalen stopped pacing and stared at her. Lorelei, what we have isn't fond. What we have could destroy both our families' carefully laid plans. She moved to him, placing her hands on his chest to still his agitation. Only if we let it. Only if we choose their plans over our own happiness. And what happens when the 2 years are up? When the divorce clause activates and everyone expects us to part ways amicably? Then we decide what we want more, their approval or each other. Kalen captured her hands in his thumb tracing over her wedding ring. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is simple. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the study door. He sprang apart just as one of the servants entered with alarming news. Magnus. Ashworth had suffered a heart attack and was being rushed to the hospital. The drive to the city was a blur of sirens and shared anxiety. In the hospital waiting room, Lorelei paced the sterile corridors while Kalen made phone calls, handling the business emergencies that would inevitably arise from Magnus's sudden incapacitation. When he finally found her collapsed in a chair, tears streaming down her face, he didn't hesitate to pull her into his arms. "You can't die," she sobbed against his chest. "Not now, not when things are finally... ... He's not going to die," Kalen said firmly. "Your father is the most stubborn man I've ever met. It'll take more than a heart attack to stop him." Dr. Peterson emerged hours later with cautiously optimistic news. Magnus was stable, but would need extensive recovery time and significant lifestyle changes. "The stress has been enormous," the doctor explained. "Between the mine investigations, the financial pressures, and the guilt he's been carrying. His heart simply couldn't take any more." That night, as they sat in Magnus's hospital room watching him sleep, Lorelei whispered, "I can't lose him, Kalen. He's all the family I have left." "You have me," Kalen replied, without thinking. The words hung in the air between them, a promise neither had planned to make, but both desperately meant. In the harsh fluorescent light of the hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the weight of mortality, their secret love suddenly felt less like a luxury and more like a necessity. "Do I?" she asked softly. "Really? Have you?" "I mean, beyond the greenhouse, beyond stolen moments, not carrying her hand, not caring who might see. Always, in every way that matters." The truth came out in the worst possible way. Aldrich Voss arrived at the estate 3 weeks after Magnus's heart attack, bringing with him a team of lawyers and a stack of documents that made Kellen's blood run cold. The old man's eyes were bright with the satisfaction of a chess master preparing his final move. "The Ashworth situation has presented us with an opportunity," Aldrich announced, spreading papers across the dining room table like a general planning. "A battle. With Magnus incapacitated and their finances in even worse shape, we can absorb their remaining assets at a fraction of their worth." "Absolutely not." Kellen's voice was deadly quiet. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "No. We're not vultures, grandfather. We don't profit from other people's tragedies." Aldrich's expression shifted from surprise to cold fury. "Don't be naive, boy. This is business. Magnus would do the same if our positions were reversed. You don't know him at all if you believe that, and you don't know him as well as you think you do." Aldrich smiled with cruel satisfaction. "Tell me, Kalen, what do you know about your wife's activities before her marriage?" Something icy crawled up Kellen's spine. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Aldrich nodded to one of his lawyers, who produced a manila folder. "Your precious Lorelei wasn't the innocent victim you imagine. She had a lover, a photographer named Darian Cross. They were planning to elope before the wedding arrangements trapped her." The world tilted sideways. Kalen felt like he was drowning in plain sight. "That's impossible." "It? She's a photographer. Herself, isn't she?" They met at university, worked together on several projects. The relationship ended rather suddenly when her father announced the engagement. Aldrich's voice was poisonously sweet. "I thought you should know what kind of woman you've been so foolishly infatuated with. Get out." Kellen's hands were shaking with rage. "Get out of this house. Now. Kalen, now." After the lawyers departed, Kaylin sat alone in the empty dining room, staring at the photographs scattered across the table. They showed Lirelei laughing with a tall, artistic-looking man holding his hand, kissing him goodbye outside a gallery. The images were dated just 2 months before their wedding. When Lirelei returned from visiting her father that evening, she found Kaylin waiting in the entrance hall, the photographs spread on the marble table between them. "Who is Darian Cross?" His voice was completely flat, emptied of all emotion. Lirelei went very still, her eyes moving from his face to the photographs and back again. "Where did you get those?" answered the question. He was someone I cared about before. What? Before you decided to lie to me for months? Before you made me believe that what we have is real? It is real. Larry stepped toward him, but Kaylin moved away like she was poisonous. "Kaylin, please let me explain." "Explain what?" "That everything you've told me about your past is a lie. That while I was falling in love with you, you were pining for someone else. I loved him, yes. But that ended when you realized you could manipulate me instead. When you figured out that playing the reluctant bride would be more profitable than honesty?" The accusation hit Lirelei like a physical blow. "How can you think that of me? After everything we've shared, everything we've built together, because I don't know what's real anymore." Kellen's composure finally cracked, months of suppressed emotion pouring out in a torrent of anger and pain. "When you kissed me? Were you pretending I was someone else during all those afternoons in the greenhouse? Stop it." Tears were streaming down Lirelei's face now. "Just stop. You're being cruel. I'm being realistic. This whole thing, this marriage, this love story we've been telling ourselves, it's built on lies and desperation and convenience. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me honestly, Lirelei. My father hadn't needed the money. If my grandfather had enforced this arrangement, would you have chosen me? Would you have looked twice at me if we'd met at some party or gallery opening?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Lirelei finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know. But that doesn't matter now, because it's the only thing that matters." Kaylin gathered up the photographs with hands that shook with suppressed emotion. "I'm sleeping in the city tonight, don't wait up." For 2 weeks, Kaylin threw himself into work with a desperate intensity, taking meetings from dawn to midnight and sleeping in his city office rather than facing the empty mansion. He told himself he was being practical, protecting his heart from further damage, making the clean break that should have happened months ago. But late at night, when exhaustion finally claimed him, he dreamed of Lirelei's hands in garden soil, her laugh echoing through glass walls. The way she looked at him like he was something precious and worth saving. The breaking point came when he received word that Magnus had taken a turn for the worse. Despite everything, Kaylin found himself racing to the hospital, his heart pounding with a fear that had nothing to do with business mergers and everything to do with the woman he couldn't stop loving. He found Lirelei asleep in the waiting room chair, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion. She had been there for 3 days straight, refusing to leave her father's side. The sight of her vulnerable and alone shattered every wall he'd built around his heart. "Lirelei." He touched her shoulder gently, and she startled awake. "Kaylin." Her eyes were confused, hope and hurt warring in their depths. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about your father." "How is he?" "Stable, but—" She gestured helplessly toward the intensive care unit. "The doctors aren't sure. His heart is so weak, and he's been asking for you. Keeps saying he needs to tell you something important." They sat in awkward silence, until Dr. Peterson emerged with an update. Magnus was conscious and requesting to see both of them. The proud man Kaylin remembered was barely recognizable in the hospital bed, connected to machines that monitored every heartbeat. But his eyes were clear when he spoke. "I need to tell you both something before it's too late." Magnus's voice was weak but determined. "About the marriage contracts, about the debts." "I lied." Lirelei leaned forward. "Papa, what do you mean?" "Ashworth finances. They were never as bad as I claimed. Yes, the mine disaster cost us dearly, but we would have survived. I could have found other solutions." Kaylin felt the world shift beneath him. "Then why? ... 'Cause I saw how you looked at her." Magnus's eyes moved between them. At the preliminary meetings before the engagement was announced, you thought I didn't notice? But I saw the way you watched Lirele when she argued with her mother about the wedding plans. And I saw how she glanced at you when she thought no one was paying attention. That's impossible, Lirele whispered. I barely noticed him. He noticed enough to ask 3 different questions about his architecture studies. He noticed enough to blush when he complimented your photography. Magnus managed a weak smile. I gambled everything on the hope that 2 intelligent, passionate people forced together might discover what they were too proud or scared to find on their own.
Ow.
The confession hung in the air between them like a revelation. Kaelin felt every assumption about their relationship crumbling. The debts were real, Magnus continued, but manageable. I made them worse through deliberately poor investments, forced a crisis that required your grandfather's intervention, manipulated both families into this arrangement because I believed. You belong together. You risked everything, Kaelin said, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief for a hunch. Not a hunch, a certainty. Love recognizes love, even when it's buried under pride and fear and family obligations. After Magnus fell back asleep, Kaelin and Lirele found themselves alone in the hospital corridor, years of misunderstanding and hurt feelings scattered between them like debris after a storm. Darian, Lirele said quietly, was someone I thought I loved, because it was safe, because it was expected, because he was the kind of man I was supposed to choose. But you. She turned to face him fully. You terrified me from the first moment, because you made me feel things I'd never felt before. Things that were too big and too real and too important to trust. I should have trusted you, Kaelin said, his voice rough with regret. I should have asked instead of assuming, should have fought for us instead of running away. We both ran. Both chose fear over faith. Kaelin reached for her hands, finding them steady and warm and perfectly familiar. Your father nearly died. Gambling on us? The least we can do is gamble on ourselves. Even if it's messy, even if we don't know how it ends, especially then, he pulled her into his arms, and she came willingly, like coming home. Love isn't supposed to be convenient. Lirele, it's supposed to be worth fighting for. As they held each other in that sterile hospital corridor, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the sound of distant machines, they finally understood what Magnus had seen from the beginning, that sometimes the best love stories begin not with choice, but with surrender. Not with certainty, but with courage. They were married by circumstance, but they chose each other by design. And in the end, that made all the difference. 6 months later, they renewed their vows in the restored greenhouse, surrounded by the plants they had saved together and the families they had somehow managed to unite. Magnus, recovered and grinning, walked his daughter down an aisle of blooming jasmine, while Aldrich Voss grudgingly admitted that perhaps some gambles were worth taking. But the most beautiful moment came when Kaelin whispered against Lirele's ear during their first dance. No more contracts, no more conditions, just us, choosing each other every day for the rest of our lives. Every day, she agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like earth and rain and second chances. Their love had been forged in the dust of broken expectations and polished by the friction of honest hearts learning to trust. It wasn't the fairy tale either had imagined, but it was theirs, real and hard-won, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection.